On this, let's now talk to Phyllis Bennis. She's director of the Institute for Policy Studies, joining me live now in Washington. Well, we've heard from our reporter there that Israeli ground forces are on their way towards Gaza. What are the chances of an all-out war, as we saw back in 2008?
Well, I think we have to be very clear that when we speak of an all-out war like Cass led, it was a very one-sided war. If you look at just the casualty figures of that horrific 3 weeks of the Israeli assault on Gaza, there were more than 1,400 Palestinians killed, the majority of them civilians, and there were 13 Israelis, of whom 7 were civilians and 5 of them were killed in friendly fire. So the disparity of casualties, and we're seeing it again now, is enormous. This is a very dangerous moment if we again look back to Cass led as a model. There's some timing parallels. In both cases, the Israelis launched their attack shortly after the U.S. elections and shortly before the U.S. was about to swear in a president at the inauguration in January, and just before Israeli elections were scheduled as well. So there's no question that this has something to do with Israeli politics. We also should remember, though, that then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, when asked about the urgency of the need for a ceasefire in Gaza because of the human suffering that had gotten already so dramatic, her answer to the United Nations was, "We don't need a ceasefire yet." That remains her legacy, and I hope that Susan Rice and her colleagues at the State Department do not take up that same claim, but in fact recognize the need for an urgent ceasefire right now, even as we look at the need to deal with this in a broader context, the context of ending the occupation of Gaza that takes the form of the siege through which Gazans are surrounded by the Israeli military.
But we are at the moment seeing Obama backing the Israelis very publicly, when before his re-election he actually distanced himself from Prime Minister Netanyahu, didn't he?
He did, but I think it was important to recognize that that distancing was very much at the level of the relationship with Bibi Netanyahu. It never was a strategic distancing from Israel. The Israeli president, for example, has already said that President Obama has done more for Israel in terms of military aid, protection at the United Nations, support for Israel's anti-missile defense system, the Iron Dome system, that in all of the important ways, he put it, President Obama has been one of the most supportive of all U.S. presidents. There was a personal dispute that remains, and I don't think this is going to change that. I think that President Obama is undoubtedly still very angry at Prime Minister Netanyahu for launching this right at this moment, where things are so tense on the border with Syria, where things are tense throughout the region, and where there is a great deal of political uncertainty going on as a result of now this current escalation, but even before this, because of the militarization of the situation in Syria.
Yes, you put this in context of the region itself and how unstable it is, and of course the tensions between Israel and Iran. Well, where could all this lead? Is this really a dangerous situation we're seeing now, Phyllis?
It's very dangerous. I don't think it's dangerous in the sense that this is going to become a ground war in which other countries surrounding Israel and Gaza, Israel and Palestine will necessarily join in. I don't see that. I don't think that the Egyptian government is going to send troops to defend Gaza, for instance. But this is going to lead to even greater political instability in the region. It's going to result, first of all, in enormous human cost to the people of Gaza, who since 2008 and 9, Operation Cass led, have been able to rebuild very, very little of what was destroyed in that operation, in those 3 weeks of assaults. Very little has been able to be rebuilt. Gazans still do not have electricity 24 hours a day. It's still only on for a few hours. If the bombing this time goes after the electrical generating plants again, as it did 4 years ago, it will be another period of years before that could be rebuilt. So there's a devastating human impact. On the political side, we're likely to see a much greater distancing between the Israeli and Egyptian governments. I don't think, as I said, that we're going to see an engagement of the Egyptian government directly militarily with Israel, certainly, but some kind of a reconsideration of the Camp David Accord and its terms. are a likely follow-up to the Egyptian decision to withdraw its ambassador from Tel Aviv, which it did just yesterday. So I think we're already seeing an increase in the instability at the political side.
Many factors at play. Thanks so much for explaining how you see the situation. Very interesting. Phyllis Bennis, the Institute for Policy Studies, joining me there in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the American